summertime, and whatever the weather, the British public feels the urge to make for the countryside. Like Moley in Wind in the Willows, something up above calls us imperiously, demanding we throw down our tools and roll around in the warm grass of a great meadow. Festivals are now an institution, something that even accountants and marketing people indulge in. But where did this come from? A throwback to our ancient ancestors, perhaps? If so, it wasn't always around. History tells us this tradition was revived in the latter part of the 20th century. So who were the pioneers of the revival? What drove them to do what they did? Here's the tale of one of these people, the man that became known as Wally Hope, the supposed leader of the tribe of Wallies. His is a tale of mystical visions, pharmaceutically induced nightmares, high court hijinks, pitched battles with the police, and a possible conspiracy and intrigue. And to tell you this story, we have to go back in time. (1967), the summer of love, and everything seems possible, as if the world was one big non-stop party. But not for 20-year-old Phil Russell. The man who was to become known as Wally Hope was banged up here in Wormwood Scrubs.
Dear me, haven't they robbed me of life? Mind you, our day will come when we can have our say. It will come. Maybe very soon. As truth always conquers ignorance.
An essay that Phil Russell wrote in prison gives an insight into how this young man saw the world.
There are two main causes of trouble in this world. One is greed, the other is lack of communication. I reckon if we had no alcohol, half the adult population would never talk or laugh. Now other people use drugs for exactly the same reason.
His essay, entitled Drugs Towards a Greater Understanding of the Problem, was a subject of high relevance to Phil because it was drugs that had got him into prison, and his mother may have played a part in it as well. So what happened? How did this well-mannered, nicely spoken lad end up here? Born in 1947, his family lived in Stoke Poges near Windsor, Berkshire, in a renovated gatehouse, an idyllic location for a happy childhood.
Family seems like the archetypal post-war perfect family. His father was working for a chemicals company. There were lots of family holidays. Comes across that his father was he was well into his family. He wasn't the sort of get home and hide behind the Sunday Times. He was involved.
But this all ended abruptly in 1959 when Phil's father died. John Snag, the radio broadcaster, well known for his commentary of the boat race, was appointed guardian.
Dr. Hatfield, 29th of October 1975. Phil inherited a considerable wealth which was to be held in trust until he was 30. When Phil's Danish mother discovered that she had been cut out of the will, she was naturally very angry and terribly hurt. She found herself a foreigner in a foreign land and a lodger in a house owned by her 12-year-old son. Eventually, when Philip was 16, his mother took off for a warmer climate, and Phil was left totally alone in the house.
But he wasn't alone in the house for long. The 60s had started to swing, and Phil's home became an open house to freedom far away.
He became involved with all the youth groups of that time, the Mods and Rockers and co. He shared hospitality with various disturbed youngsters of the hippie type, and ran the house as a sort of commune. However, the house was always kept clean and tidy. Attempts were made by his guardians to encourage him to get further education, with a view to finding some useful employment. However, Philip was too insecure to respond to the educational system. He described very clearly his experience at an art school. He stated that they were destroying my imagination by their demands that I should do it their way.
Hello, Nick, you old mutant.
Hello, mate.
Forgot the Miles Davis then?
So Phil dropped out of art school, but not before forming a close friendship with a young fellow named Nick. Together they created their own lexicon of catchphrases.
What else you got under that
They
coat?
called each other mutants.
The humour was from the Goons, and the Goons' humour had a repetitive nature to it. It was just a bit of shared madness, idiocy, humour.
When he was 20, his mother returned, and Philip welcomed her with open arms. He told her what wonderful times they had at their way-out parties, and his experiences with drugs.
Not long after the mother's return, the police raided their house in Stoke Poges. Rumour had it that the person making the call was Phil's mother.
Police came in and knew exactly what they were looking for. They pulled some cannabis out of an umbrella in the hall. We were all charged, but they wanted to make an example out of Phil, as it was his house. Phil was sure that his mother had set us up. Maybe she thought if he was locked up, she'd get the house. I don't know. Phil got 18 months.
Of course, it's perfectly possible that Phil's mother played no part at all in Phil's imprisonment. But Phil and his friend Nick clearly thought so at the time. And yet, sitting in his cell, young Phil harboured no bitterness against his mother.
He was sad that his mother didn't get it, and there's letters from the prison where he says, well, at least I've got a picture of her to keep my faith.
Phil also remained in contact with his fellow art school dropout Nick. His letters to him reveal his sense of humour, his dreams. When he was moved out from Wormwood Scrubs to Ashwood Remand, life in prison got a little sunnier.
Dear Nick, you old mutant. We're having a party tonight and they're inviting Miss World. You can guess whose cell the party's in? I wonder how my mother feels now.
He starts realising that he's stupid to just be squandering himself on just living in a sort of almost what was becoming a squat that he owned. Through prison, he starts reading some of the books, reading Huxley, reading The Prophet. That was a major book to him. At that point, he's starting to look into a more spiritual side of things.
So the solitude of prison gave Phil the opportunity to reflect, read, and to develop a philosophy that he would let loose on the world when they finally let him out.
Dr. Ted!
Sorry, am I late?
Oh, no. They let me out half an hour early for good behaviour.
I was battling.
Not bad. I don't think I'll be going there again next year, eh?
Part of the probation for getting him out of Wormwood Scrubs is that he wasn't allowed to return back to Stoke Poges. And so basically he said, well, if I can't return there, we'll get that place sold. And he went to live with the Hatfields.
The Hatfields were two doctors, Edward and Sylvia Hatfield, appointed by guardian John Snade to provide Phil with a home in a large house in Ongar, Essex.
He gets out and he starts travelling the world, and one of the places that he goes is over to Denmark to make the peace with his mum. To him, I think it was really important that he became friends with his mum again.
You know, you won't be able to go back to the old house in Stoke Poges.
Oh no, I won't be able to go home again. Does this radio work?
A trust fund meant that young Phil was a man with the means to travel, and there was a whole wide world to see.
He visited places like the birthplace of Venus. He visited Indian reservations, kibbutzes. It was all part of him putting together this picture in his mind of what he really wanted to create through the commune movement, through the festival movement. And so things that could be argued to be educational could be for the making of the man, because they talked back then.
But there was plenty going on back in Britain. The summer of love had evolved into a full-blown counterculture. Revolution was in the air. The big event of the summer of 1970 was the Isle of Wight Festival. With a turnout of 600,000, it was the UK's biggest music festival to date. The mammoth lineup included Jimi Hendrix, The Who, Miles Davis, The Doors and Mungo Jerry, who refused to play when in all the chaos they were given a rearranged on-stage time in the early hours. But even greater controversy raged over the admission fee. £3, £40 in today's money.
You will not be allowed in without a ticket, so please have a ticket and have it ready to show the steward.
It is my job to entertain you. The fact that there is an exchange that on the stage, whatever it costs, has to go out there in the form of music, that you have to exchange £3 for it, is the way that the world is made up. I cannot help it. Please, I have no control over that.
Power to the people, motherfuckers! Just 1 minute. I just think one thing. This festival business is becoming a psychedelic concentration camp where people are being exploited. And there's enough of that. What is all this peace and love shit when you have police dogs out there?
The festival was started as a commercial concern, but it's fast becoming a people's festival, you know? And the people that are here are going to use this festival as they want. And they're going to use the facilities as they want. And, you know, if necessary, we're going to enter the festival ground in order to hear what we came to see.
But where's that with this love festival thing? Where's all this peace? When that dog attacked me, there was no bloody love and peace in that. He didn't take a chunk out of me with any sort of flower in his mouth.
They don't want these cats to have fun, man. Joke. They want the pockets empty. Right, empty your pockets, man, and get down there and give them the fucking bread. That's why you're here. Well, we're not here for that, man. We're here so we can sit up on that hill and fucking groove.
Outside the festival area lurked political activists like the White Panthers in the area dubbed Canvas City. Hawkwind and the Pink Fairies put on their own free mini-festival and provided an alternative to the megastars on show at the main event. So the 1970 Isle of Wight Festival became a crossroads for the music scene. In one direction went the arena and stadium rock. In the other direction was the free festival movement. Legend has it that in among the vast crowds of the Isle of Wight Festival, somebody lost their dog. Wally!
Wally!
Quite a lost dog's name,
Wally!
Wally, passed around the festival until it seemed like everyone was crying out Wally, and so the name became part of the hippie lexicon.
And they'd just all be calling out for Wally, and it was like an in-joke of people who went to festivals. But it was like picked up from that, so it's like this legendary figure, like a Spartacus-type figure, you know.
In his search for like-minded souls, it's no surprise to find Phil here in March 71, under the Westway in Ladbroke Grove, for a meeting organised by a street carnival movement, the Dwarves. The event was covered in West London Gazette, carrying a picture of Phil dancing.
Ostensibly, the meeting was to choose candidates for the forthcoming elections in Camden and Kensington and Chelsea. But it turned into a 3-hour-long carnival of dance, music and song, with all matters concerning political representations being adjourned. We don't take any of the elections seriously. Our campaign is a joke, but a nice one we hope, explained one of the dwarves. Judging by the crowd they drew in Portobello Road on Saturday afternoon, their election campaign should put some much needed life back into the local hustings.
get yourself elected and then resign instantly and watch their system fall apart. I think that was all very light-hearted, pretty much the same way as the Monster Raving Loony Party is, to take the mickey out of the politics rather than to enter politics.
Despite a manifesto with policies covering the national elf and gnome ownership, the votes at London Borough Council election of May 1971 fell way short. The four dwarf candidates got a grand total of 344 votes, coming last in every ward they contested, and after the article in the West London Gazette, failed to get very much publicity at all. Phil moved on to Glastonbury Fair in June 1971.
71 Glastonbury was a major shaker for Wally. Saw people living for 10, 11 days, communally, people were giving out free food, people were looking after each other, and the money that was put into it was put in by the Kerr and by Arabella Churchill, Churchill's granddaughter. He saw a lot of things that he liked at Glastonbury.
And it's quite possible that Phil indulged in some psychedelics at this point. LSD users fell into two camps: those who did it for a laugh, and those that did it for spiritual enlightenment. Phil fell into the latter.
He used to use acid as a sacrament. He wasn't a leisure user. He didn't do that. What he did was to find a spot, take acid and do his worship, do his mantras and all the rest of it. And that was his spirituality.
It was later on in the summer of 71 Phil claimed to have met Jesus in Cyprus. No, not that Jesus. The actual Son of God. From here on in, he went about telling everybody about this holy vision. What this all meant was not exactly clear, but it was right after this that Phil came up with the concept of a squatting commune, where everyone is called Wally. This would thwart the legal process, making it difficult for them to target any individual. And in this commune of equals, Phil gave himself the name of Wally Hope, from the top his grandmother had made him. Also around this time, Phil had his dream vision, which he shared with Tim Sebastian, founder of the Secular Order of Druids.
I was holding the hand of an older man, looking over a beautiful and peaceful valley. Suddenly a fox broke cover, followed by hounds and strong horses ridden by red-coated huntsmen. The man pointed into the valley and said, "That, my son, is where you're heading." I soon found out that I am the fox.
But Phil, now being called Wally Hope, was not the only person getting visions. Bill Ubi Dwyer, a man with a big beard and even bigger personality, was talking about claiming back the land. Wally Hope attended the meeting in Holland Park, called by Ubi, to make arrangements for the free festival at the Royal Park in Windsor. The debate spilled over into the evening news. Preparations for the festival are now well underway. Support is substantial. We are profoundly peaceful, and the prospect of well over 1 million of us should cause no alarm. Hippies are exceptionally well-mannered and civilised.
I've seen their leaflets and I think it is absolutely ridiculous. I would think they are as mad as hatters, and I've no doubt it will completely fizzle out. But the trouble is that if a lot of these hairy specimens hear it's going on, they will probably turn up anyway.
The jamboree's held in the shadow of Windsor Castle and is illegal. The bylaws of the Great Park prohibit music and camping.
I'm not sure it is illegal. Henry IV and Henry VII issued royal charters permitting people's festivals on this side. Those charters have never been honoured, and we're honouring them.
Massively outnumbered by the police. The police totally freaked out and thought, oh wow, we're going to have all these people down there. I think it was 3 policemen to every one that turned up for the first Windsor Festival. But they still had a bit of a picnic and a party. People camped out there for 3 days. They busted, I think, 60 people for having drugs. And they basically thought they'd dealt with it, thought it was a silly idea and it hadn't come to much and it would fizzle out.
Windsor 72 was widely dismissed as a flop in the national and underground press. But the free festival movement was growing into something that the older generation feared as satanic. This letter to the Radio Times, published in October 72, illustrates the nation's generational divide.
Dear Radio Times, I began watching your show Top of the Pops under the misconception that it was a music programme. I soon discovered my fallacy. The characters in this hit parade have as much disdain for musical ability as they obviously have for personal hygiene. Week after week I have endured squawking legions of the Great Unwashed, with names like Mungo Jerry and Middle of the Road, but I'm still recovering from the latest addition to this menagerie. They call themselves Lieutenant Pigeon. This bunch of reprobates have somehow managed to rope Mrs. Mills into their insanity. Whatever next, we live in perplexing times.
And in these perplexing times, Phil and his tribe of Wallies was getting himself known. But his close friend Nick felt a distance forming between them.
Phil would appear wearing bright multicoloured shirts made by Mon, his Danish girlfriend. We weren't talking the same language anymore. His stories of organising events or whatever would come out in one long rush and go on for as long as you could stay awake. He couldn't come down and just enjoy a normal day out. We'd take loads of acid, we'd kind of humour him, but after a couple of days we'd just get pissed off with him.
Spread it out through to our fingertips and pass it on from person to person, yeah?
Yeah, sure, Phil.
The police thought they had dealt with the Windsor Free Festival in '72, but Ubi Dwyer's fervent promotion meant that many more people were planning to turn up to Windsor '73. This time 1,500 people showed up. Rumour has it that Hawkwind played a part in the proceedings.
They used an ice cream van. Its headlights were pointed at the stage. This van had an AC generator for their refrigerator. So Hawkwind set up their equipment and they'd taken a line straight from the ice cream van into their equipment. So as they started to play, smoke started to rise. Of course, everybody thought it was part of Hawkwind's act.
Wally defied a column of police officers shouting, "You can't fight us! I'm wearing my party trousers! Join the party!" The policeman declined the invitation and gave him a beating. Phil came away from Windsor '73 bruised and disillusioned.
He saw something that he didn't like in the organisation. He saw the committee getting together and saying, well, the burger people have got to give us more money. And they said to this one, it was a hot dog stand, he said, well, you give us the money. He said, well, I haven't made the money. And they said, well, we want the money. And he tried to drive off site, and they'd threatened that they'd burn his wagon. And they did. They burnt his wagon. And Wally hated that. It was the People's Free Festival. Then that hot dog man is the people too. That was when he decided that something purer should happen.
After Windsor '73, Wally went to visit his friend Nick in Devon, who remained unimpressed.
He brought a couple of Wallies with him. Right plankheads. We tried to get him to come and live with us in the country. I was into farming at the time, but it wasn't for him.
So instead of farming in Devon, Phil set off for Ibiza. And it was here, looking out to sea, that Phil got his vision. Everything seemed perfect. A festival in Windsor, the Queen's own backyard, was always going to face problems. So let's leave the lady alone and take the free festival somewhere out of the way. Somewhere magical.
By claiming Stonehenge as the spiritual heart of this nation, he's also claiming a bit of land and the right to use that land for the people of this nation. So it becomes a kind of spiritual and a political message.
So when Phil got back to England, he had just one thing on his mind. He went to the commune in Dial House, Essex, to see his friend Jeremy Rutter, now known as Penny Rambo of Crass, to help him organise it.
Wally had this idea of doing Stonehenge. At first I thought it was a fucking stupid idea. You know, who'd want to go? I didn't want to go, but, you know, he was so enthusiastic that eventually I got convinced by it. And so we agreed to, you know, work on it from here. Because really, Stonehenge was pretty much just a lump of stones and no one cared a fuck about them in those days. He wanted it there because it was quiet, because Stonehenge was away from everywhere. Who'd care a fuck if, you know, 1,000 hippies turned up in the middle of nowhere?
So an invite list was put together that included the Beatles, the Queen, Colonel Gaddafi, the Dalai Lama, the British Airways stewardesses, and a series of increasingly deranged flyers were worded, designed and made up at Dial House.
Now our Lord God, Father the Son, invites you to a tribal jamboree at the sacred pulsating lost heart of England, free Stonehenge. Dedicated to the son of the sun, born Cyprus 1960. Love, hope, amen. Every day is a Sunday. Everyone is a Wally.
Not wanting the neighbouring farmer to freak out, Wally wrote him this letter, ensuring that he would do just that.
With all well-meaning respect, our Lord God and His Son Jesus Christ has ordered a spiritual pilgrimage to Stonehenge on 20th of June to fulfil the 2 commandments: love God, love, peace and freedom. Your best mate, Wally. Help for the kids.
On 963 kilohertz medium wave, Europe's voice of loving awareness is Radio Caroline.
Good morning, oh Caroline.
Radio Caroline, in the run-up to the 74 festival, were running daily adverts in most of their evening shows saying, yeah, get on down to Stonehenge.
No one was safe. Wally would tell anybody who would listen about Stonehenge, and Wally was notorious for being able to talk for 8 hours on his favourite subjects.
But he met Jesus in Cyprus. He'd just all go round campfires and tents and things at these festivals and just tell everybody all about it and go invite people back to Stonehenge.
So in the event, how many people actually showed?
Only him and his mate knew anything about it. That's why only a few people turned up.
The best figures I could give were probably about 800 people were here for a few days after solstice, and then that dropped off pretty quickly to 30 people, and that was quite a quick drop off. That was to be expected. You can't talk many people into squatting government land.
Of all the bands talked about, only one actually played in the end: electronic music pioneers Zorch. So though the numbers were not earth-shattering, the general feeling among the Wallies was that the first Stonehenge Free Festival was a roaring success. After all, it was all about quality and not quantity, and unlike Windsor, there had been no trouble.
One of the big mistakes was, which at the time we were unaware, all of us were unaware of, was actually that the Ministry of Defence have got their major chemical laboratories for chemical warfare very close to Stonehenge.
So 30 or so assorted Wallies stayed on to live on the land, much to the chagrin of the Department of Environment, who set a court order in action to evict the residents of Fort Wally.
About 30 were living here full time, and it was always fluctuating. I mean, I've talked to many people who were just hitchhiking past and stopped here for a few days. Some people who sort of came to visit Stonehenge by bus and then didn't get the bus home. It was very much about living in the land, celebrating the land, coming alive here.
It was an open camp, and I immediately got there. We were made welcome. Wake up in the morning, everybody's coughing and itching. That's where I picked up the head lice.
There wasn't a leader. We were quite against the idea of leaders. Wally was this charismatic character who'd appear, sometimes with air hostesses, and then equally disappear, but he'd never say where he was going.
He was a very clean hippie. He had his standards. He made sure that it was all kept nice and tidy. The rest of them were very dirty. It was hard not to be dirty when you're living on the side of the road, Salisbury Plain.
The Evening Standard sent one of their reporters to spend a day with the Wallies. With a court order in motion, the national media began to take an interest.
I mean, I was asked to do it, and it seemed a very interesting case, which it was, in many ways. So, yeah, so I said, right, I'm up for that. They were all vibrant characters, and of course they were costumed in various bizarre ways. I seem to remember that Wally Hope came in the uniform of the Cypriot National Guard, which was pretty striking. And our first line of defence was that this couple who owned Stonehenge had left it to the nation in 1918. So argument number one was that the nation meant you and me, and in particular the Wallies. The other line of argument was the Department of the Environment had to show that they'd taken all reasonable steps to identify the occupants. And our line was, well, you didn't go far enough to find out who they were. And they said, yes, we did. Everybody we asked, they said it was Wally. And we were arguing, well, perhaps you should have asked the milkman or what have you. So you could see it wasn't the strongest of cases.
August 1974. The USA newspapers was covering the Watergate scandal. The German newspapers were preoccupied with the Baader-Meinhof terrorists, and Italy had the Red Brigade. Britain, meanwhile, had the Wallies.
Wally, Wally and Wally, and their mates Wally and Wally, are giving Whitehall the willies. Stonehenge has always stimulated the rich, engaging springs of English dottiness. The document, delivered by the Department of Environment to the camp, is a masterpiece of po-faced humour, addressed to one known as Arthur Wally, another known as Philip Wally, another known as Ron Wally, and 4 others, each known as Wally.
The sober calm of the High Court was shattered yesterday as the Wallies of Stonehenge sought justice. A lady Wally called Egypt with bare feet and bells on her ankles blew soap bubbles in rarefied legal air and knelt to meditate.
After the judge's decision, Mr. Wally Hope said, "These legal arguments are like a cannonball bouncing backwards and forwards in blancmange. We won because we hold Stonehenge in our hearts. We are not squatters, we're men of God." Up the Wallies. Happy losers say, "We won because we made friends with the judge." The Wallies yesterday got their marching orders. Their explanation that God had ordered them to pitch their wigwams on Salisbury Plain did not wash with Justice Stocker. But when you're a Wally, it seems you can never lose. Indeed, their fast-talking leader, Wally Hope, emerged to announce, "We have won. The judge told us we were 100% good people. We are friends with the judge."
And at the end, Wally Hope handed him a piece of paper with a drawing of his son with a wig on it, which delighted the judge. And then Wally said, "Mr. Judge, I'd just like to say you were really cool." The judge said, "Well, thank you, Mr. Wally."
After the court case, the Wallies were interviewed by Radio London.
We're disappointed, but we're not downhearted. We're going to move into the fields just across the way.
And we got another Wally here. What was your reaction to the news, in fact?
We haven't lost the case. We never will lose the case. It's a question, we can't lose the case, otherwise we all blow ourselves into oblivion, you know. We can live anywhere on the planet we like.
I think it's a real drag. I would have thought we should be allowed to at least look after the land. Well, as far as I'm concerned, they may have won the court case, but they've got to get us off. I appreciate this place as our home more than anything else, and I'm prepared to defend God's land with my life.
Wally Hope, the Wallies leader, was not so despondent. He told us why.
Well, because we had the Ace of Hearts. I got an Aztec case, and in that Aztec case we had the Ace of Hearts, and that's the winning card before we even started.
Tell me, in fact, there is a court injunction that you have to leave the site. What are you planning doing then?
Well, we're going to grow some wings and hover over it.
Yeah, in realistic terms, actually. Whereabouts are you thinking of going?
We got some public land that we can go to.
You have got some public land,
yes,
but you won't be leaving Stonehenge, I believe.
No, I mean it's public where we're going.
It's public where you're going, but you'll still be within the vicinity of Stonehenge.
Well, I mean, the Lord God wants us there, and there's nothing that can stop us. You know, I mean, the Lord God, you know, is the highest law in this country. You know, and I mean, He's very unhappy with the world at the moment, and He wants us not to have an energy crisis, and the best way is to plug into Him, and Stonehenge is the best place to get plugged in.
All the Wallies were convinced that the bailiffs would be beaten by the power of love, but they vowed there would be no violence.
Because of official secrecy, it's hard to say for certain, but it's around this time that the police began Operation Stuff, standing for Stop These Unlawful Free Festivals. We know of its existence through Busted, the book by ex-undercover policeman Martin Pritchard, published in 1978.
The free shows were now being used to demonstrate people power and freedom for kids to do their own things. 10,000 people were being organised for a direct confrontation with the police. It was mob rule and anarchy, all set to pop music.
So with a major B in the police bonnets, the stage was set for Windsor 74 and a massive confrontation with the police.
In 74, you could describe that as a battle. Police had massively underestimated how many people were there. They'd had a helicopter flying over, and they'd counted the tents the day before they wanted to do the eviction. They thought they were moving in against 1,000 people. They were actually moving in against 4,000 people, and they only had 800 police officers. So when that line came across the field, they expected a lot less resistance.
It was very violent, completely unprovoked. So I got dragged along by my hair by 3 cops. I got arrested. All these hippies jumped on top of these cops that were arresting me. So I've escaped.
Still got a scar on my head, drinking a cup of tea on a log when I saw a line of coppers, and being a young lad I thought, well, they'll just tell us to shift. Now come along, move along now. But this copper moved up to me and didn't say a word. It didn't say stand up, didn't say anything. He just looked at me and then dragged me right round the side of the head. And I don't think I've been the same since.
The police operations would first of all nobble the PA, nobble the stages, start dismantling the stages, and people psychologically knew they'd be losing the festival. So everyone gathered around the stages so the police couldn't take them down.
They went in and nicked these people for obstruction almost immediately before they had a chance to even say anything, and then carted them off, leaving their possessions behind, tents and so on, and not giving them the opportunity to gather up their possessions. I mean, it was just nasty and crass.
While Windsor 72 and 73 had seen escalating skirmishes between hippies and the police, Windsor 74 was a whole different ketting of fish. Even the Sun and the Daily Mail were shocked. Wally was quoted extensively in this Daily Mirror article.
We had something wonderful going on here, and the Blue Meanies just desecrated it. This was a nation of love we built here. We had a fantastic culture, there was a tremendous community spirit, and the food was great. Apart from the hot dogs.
The Blue Meanies, a reference to the film Sergeant Pepper, meaning the police, gave Wally an even bigger beating than the year before. He went back to Fort Wally to nurse his wounds. With the onset of the cold weather, the Wallies moved to the interiors of a squat in Amesbury, a village nearby to Stonehenge. They had their Christmas party and the media spotlight died down. The violence and legal obstructions of 74 had only served to make Wally more determined to make Stonehenge the People's Free Festival. And with the beginning of 1975, he set about promoting Stonehenge with intense vigour.
We exchanged letters over the winter. He was saying, oh, this summer it's going to be the year of no compromise.
He goes all guns. I mean, I've got a lovely postcard and it's sent back to the Hatfields. On the back it just says, look out bad world, the Wallies are coming. And it's got smiley faces drawn all over the place. You can tell he's got away with it. He's done what he wanted to do. So he's got all that under his belt, and so he's got all that energy, and he starts pumping that into Stonehenge 75. He's met Roger Hutchinson. Roger said that he'd do the poster that became the classic 75 poster with the Druids standing over the stones.
He got back to that squat in Amesbury, coming back from Cyprus, spent the night there.
His car was rainbow painted, had the teppy on top. He was well known. He was well known in London when he was handing out pamphlets and leaflets. So that parked outside a squat would have been noticed very quickly.
The police came round in the morning looking for, well, they say, squaddies afterwards without leave.
You get cosmic kick in the balls!
Found him there, looked through his wallet, found some acid, arrested him.
He's arrested by policemen that shouldn't have had powers to go in there and search in the way they did, but by saying they were looking for an army deserter, it bypasses a lot of civil laws.
This is what the whole thing about no compromise. He said, no, this is the sacrament of the New Age. I am a priest of the New Age.
And very quickly he's remanded down to Winchester prison. He was in Winchester for about 8 days, and then he turns up on parade wearing his pyjamas because he said that the prison uniform was making him itch.
Well, there's an anachronism here because actually people on remand don't have to wear prison clothes.
He gets taken into court and he tells the magistrate the same thing. They take him downstairs and go, oh, this guy, though, he's crazy. Get the doctor in there.
He goes to a doctor, and this doctor, this psychiatrist, says to him as he walks into the room, who am I dealing with today? Meaning, am I talking to Wally Hope or am I talking to Phil Russell? So before before Phil's even walked into the appointment, this doctor already knows that he's going to do him for schizophrenia because he regards Wally Hope as being one side of Phil Russell, and therefore that schizophrenia is sectioned indefinitely, which gives them complete power over his life. When John Snake went to try and visit Phil in hospital, he's not allowed in, but he goes over to Dial House and says, you do realise that Wally's been taken away.
I did not hear about this until about 3 weeks later, when I received a letter from the Salisbury Probation Service asking me for a report. I then visited Philip in Winchester Prison. It was very obvious that he was under heavy sedation. Philip was discharged to the Old Manor Hospital in Salisbury, sectioned under the 1959 Mental Health Act. He continued to complain about his drugged condition.
While Phil was undergoing treatment at the Old Manor Hospital, he filled in this form to the National Council of Civil Liberties.
When I was arrested, I regarded myself mentally and physically sound. But after Dr. Scott's treatment of Modicate every 2 weeks and 6 tumblers of Largatil a day, then Dr. West's treatment of haloperidol 3, Semedrine 10, Stelazine 15, Modicate 15, I feel a bit scrambled.
The medical profession refer to these drugs as the mental cosh. It's like being awake but being unconscious.
He said the doctors had overdosed him on purpose, saying, "Get off cloud 9, sonny."
As his treatment continued at the Old Manor House Psychiatric Facility, Phil was refused all visitors except for direct family members. With his father dead and his mother wanting nothing to do with him, friend G. Voucher, a member of the Dial House commune, had a plan.
He was in big trouble. You know, anyone that comes here and we hear they're in big trouble, then we're going to try and help where we can. So I thought, well, the only way I can get close to him is to pretend to be his sister. So, which I did. I went down there on my own. They really were tight on him. And I can remember sitting out in the garden. It was a really sunny day. And I'd said to him, look, let's go out and let's walk in the sun. But he couldn't do that because the drugs made him light sensitive. We had to go and sit under the tree. And the doctors were just standing there in their white coats looking down on us. I just thought, what is this? This is crazy.
In that short 2 weeks, he'd become dangerously ill. Well, I mean, at this point, we knew we had to get him out. So for the next few days, we started working on how.
We had discussed with some friends who knew about the section he was being put in under, and they said the only way you can break that section is to kidnap him and hold him till the date had passed.
We'd arranged for a boat to take him from the east coast near here, you know, on a small harbour where no one would have noticed, a sort of pleasure boat going out, to take him across to Holland, and then from Holland we were going to take him across Europe down to Spain.
They had ruse cars, they had a private boat that was available on the east coast to take him over to Holland. From Holland they had friends that would drive him across Europe, across Spain, and then eventually hopefully take him to Ibiza, where he would have been safe.
Anyway, so then G and myself went down to the hospital, and obviously we had to have some agreement from him as to our plans. The plan was pretty comprehensive. It didn't actually require anything more.
When we brought up the subject of leaving, breaking the law, he was too afraid. Absolutely could not even put his head round it. It was impossible.
He also had this sort of stupid belief that somehow or other he was going to come through it. Maybe he had to have that belief because it was like being in a fucking nightmare. We realised that without at least his passive agreement, there was no way we were going to get him out. You know, if he was going to be screaming and yelling, no chance. So, I mean, that was a fucking awful decision to have to make.
With Phil still in the Old Manor Hospital, the Stonehenge Festival of 1975 went ahead. It was far more successful than the previous year. More bands played and greater numbers stayed. The festival was everything that Phil hoped it would be, except that he wasn't there.
I went down in the hope of try and recruit. We thought, well, we should do a march from the festival, do a march, 10 miles, and make a protest outside the mental hospital. And halfway through the second day, we heard an announcement from the stage where you will have noticed 2 guys wandering around, and an exact description of Mick and myself. Don't talk to them, police. At which point, what had been a nice couple of days out turned into a fucking nightmare. No one would talk to us, people would just shun us. There was nothing we could do, so we left. The festival went on for about a week. On the day last hippie drew out from the site, in other words, the site was closed in the sense that there wasn't anyone there anymore, Wally was released, miraculously cured. He no longer was a schizophrenic.
They let him out on the 4th of July 1975, and he's in a sorry state. He gets his car back out of police impound. He takes 2 days driving it. He has to keep pulling into services, constantly falling asleep because of all these drugs that are in his system, dozing off at the wheel. I mean, they let him out in an unfit state to drive.
After the mental hospital in Salisbury, Phil came to stay with us in Branscombe in Devon. He was like an old man. He could barely speak or walk. We tried to walk with him along the beach, but he'd lost it by then. We put him on the train for Ongar in Essex, where he went to stay with the Hatfields.
I was very worried to find that there was little change in his condition. He was still walking about like a zombie, much the same as when I saw him in Winchester jail. He complained of stiffness of his muscles, his face was rigid and expressionless, and he felt lifeless. It seemed to me that he was suffering from persistent chronic dyskinesia, and I began to have serious doubts that he would ever recover his old self.
Finally made his way back here. I do remember taking him by the arm and marching him up and down this garden to try and get his limbs to work, his arms to swing.
At a very base level, he'd got a modicum of sense, as he could eat, but he would eat sloppily. He didn't know what he wanted to eat. You know, he'd lost all of those things, but, you know, all of those sort of biological drives were still functioning. But he'd cry all night. You know, he was just miserable. I mean, he was ruined, basically.
Chronic dyskinesia is a situation that comes about after massive doses of the antipsychotic drugs that they were pumping him full of. And it's basically where your nerves can't communicate with your brain. So when he was trying to walk, he'd be trying to put his right arm forward at the same time as his right leg. He'd be mixing his feet up. His feet would knock against each other. He couldn't go out in the sun. One of the drugs, Weldon, makes you photosensitive, so that your skin starts blistering and your eyes start streaming. He was a sun worshipper, and they'd killed that part of him.
Elsewhere in the Free Festival movement, Ubi Dwyer had been arrested in May 75, giving out flyers outside the Led Zeppelin concerts in Earl's Court. On the 10th of July, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. But was the establishment also making concessions? A new Labour government had taken the helm in 1974 with ostensibly a more tolerant viewpoint of the counterculture than the outgoing Conservatives. While the ban on the Windsor Free Festival remained in place, Home Secretary Roy Jenkins offered a free festival at a disused airfield in Oxfordshire, Watchfield.
That was an attempt by the Labour government. Lord Melchett at the time was the Environment Minister, and he thought, well, one way of keeping him out the Queen's back garden, actually, is to offer them a bit of ground where they can just carry on without bothering anybody.
And there's a sort of stone to throw the people who'd been so needlessly beaten up by the police at Windsor.
We must have heard somehow that Phil's got back to his guardian's place up in Old Ongar. And so we phoned him up. I said, we're going to Watchfield. You know, come with us and we'll take you down there.
He then heard about Watchfield Festival and wanted to go. We really tried to stop him, but we couldn't, you know, physically restrain him. I mean, he had his own free choice. How fucked up he was. He went.
I didn't like Watchfield. I've never been to a place with such a totally flat and alienating vibe. It was rather as if a community of people who'd got to know each other over a few years were suddenly split up and transferred to various council estates 100 or 2 miles from where they'd been previously living. It was alienating.
At Watchfield, I remember his teepee was up, so I decided to go and visit him, and it was quite sombre inside. He wasn't radiating, as he usually did, you know, sort of radiating love and light and being charismatic. Of course, in my sort of naivety, it bounced up, hi there, Wally, how are you? And really good to see you. He just looked up to me and said, Mary, they've broken me. He made reference to the chemical kosh, made reference to feeding him lots of very nasty downers.
He's a dancer, he was a mover, and he was staggering around unbalanced and whatever it is.
The Watchfield Festival caused a great deal of confusion and annoyance to the undercover policeman Martin Pritchard. This is what he said in his book, Busted.
We were working against drugs full time, yet we were forced to stand back and watch all these people knocking them out left, right and centre and getting away with it. That mob had been virtually untouchable. It didn't make sense. There was a police video film of this, shot very secretly, and I've seen it at headquarters, but no one was allowed to do anything at the time.
Also with video cameras at Watchfield was Hoppy Hopkins, editor of the International Times, and Sue Hall. Inside Chris Wally's teepee, they conducted the only known video interview with Phil. The topic was the plans for a permanent festival site.
I didn't know what his usual self was. All I could go on was what he was like in front of me. He seemed pretty lucid. He didn't seem distressed in any way.
Well, the thing is that for the past 3 years, every time there's a festival, everybody talks about festivals all the time.
What we do have is a transcript of the interview. This interview demonstrates that despite his ordeal, Phil was still very much committed to the Free Festival movement. Here we have him talking about buying land. This was not pie in the sky. He was 28 years of age and 2 years away from his 30th birthday when he would have inherited a considerable sum of money and a piece of land. 4 days after giving this interview, on Wednesday the 3rd of September 1975, Phil Russell was dead.
After leaving Watchfield, Phil returned to stay with us in Ongar. My wife saw Philip at 5 p.m. when she went out to her clinic in Chelmsford. He seemed his normal self. At 7 p.m. the surgery finished, and the receptionist went through the ground floor of the house, found nobody about, and so locked up. My wife arrived back at 9 p.m. and found the doors open, but no lights on. On turning the kitchen lights on, she found Philip unconscious on the floor, with obvious obstruction to the breathing from vomit. I got home at 10 p.m. to find the house empty, but the television was still going in the recreation room on the first floor, so I can only conclude that he was looking at television when the staff locked up at 7 p.m. He must have come downstairs, unlocked the back door, and collapsed shortly before my wife got back home.
People used to shout Wally and the cry would go up and everybody'd echo Wally, and somebody cried Wally's dead. And I remember being really upset about that.
The CID prescribed me with the following information. Philip was prescribed 500 milligrams of Largactil 4 times a day and 1 injection of Modicate weekly from the 25th of April to the 9th of May when he was in Winchester Jail under the care of Dr. Scott.
Wally Hope, aged 28, the self-styled leader of the sun-worshipping cult, the Wallies of Stonehenge, has died, and forensic experts are still trying to find out how. The former BBC broadcaster, Mr. John Snage, who was Mr. Russell's guardian, said yesterday, "All I can tell you is that an autopsy was held and that there is no question of suicide."
Wally was a great writer. He'd have left a hell of a suicide note. He'd have said a goodbye to the world with a cosmic kick in the balls.
As Wally being the personality that he was, and knowing that even at his worst when he was in hospital, he was still sending me crazy notes, he, without any question, would have written something. He was that sort of personality. He wouldn't have gone without a screen, without his last prayer or something or other. He would have done it. He would have to do.
There was no medication packaging. There was no bottles around. There were no boxes, not even in the bins. So even if he was being tidy and put everything away in the bins and took the bins out to the garden, there was nothing. There was no medication wrappers or anything.
Dr. Hatfield must have got the police papers. But one of the things I immediately noticed, as did the doctor, was a needle mark on Wally's arm. Well, there's no way at all in which Wally ever would have used needles. It just was absolutely unthinkable. And certainly no one in the hospital had used needles on his arm. I mean, he had needles in his arse. There was one single mark on his arm. Well, that, possibly wouldn't have been particularly interesting if it hadn't disappeared from subsequent reports. So the needle marks on his arse remained part of the reports, but the needle mark on his arm didn't.
The inquiry ended up getting adjourned 3 times.
In the coroner's, that was sort of like a pantomime out of Alice in Wonderland. Dr. Scott was no longer available because he had left and gone to Australia. The investigating officer claimed in the court that he had spoken at length with all parties concerned with Wally since his being freed from the mental institution. Not once had that particular inspector visited Dial House or the Guardian. And they absolutely would not hear of any objection. We tried to make objections and they just basically closed the book and walked out.
Post-mortem revealed that the immediate cause of death was inhalation of vomit. The stomach showed signs of poisoning by some irritant. All other organs were healthy. He left no evidence of suicide in that there were no empty containers and no notes.
Sun Worshippers Inquest. Police await drug test result. The inquest on 28-year-old Philip Russell, the leader of a sun worshipping group, was opened last Thursday and adjourned until December the 9th. The result of a drug test being carried out by the police laboratory was still awaited, said PC Jeffrey Licence. In reply to the coroner's query as to the lapse of time before the inquest, the officer said that the laboratory had to start from scratch and go through all known drugs.
They take 3 months to come to the conclusion that he died of something that he'd have had access to. Well, they would have been the first things they tested. You know, when asked by the courts why it's taken them so long, they're going, because we've got to go through the full pharmacopoeia, you know, and test every known substance. But the first drugs you test are the drugs that you know a suicide might have had access to.
The official verdict came through. Suicide. Phil's body had been cremated after the second hearing, so the claims about the needle mark could never be proven. Phil's ashes were put into a wooden box constructed by Jeremy Rutter. He badged it, Victim of Ignorance.
Penny Rambo wanted the box burnt, but the box got hijacked by Sid Rawle and some of the other kind of festival goers.
Hippie leader Sid Rawle took it upon himself to be high priest of the ceremony and say a few words.
People waved oak leaves around, banged drums, mixed water, generally did ceremonies that are invented. I mean, they haven't got any historical background at all, I think.
I think there was a lot of bandwagon jumping. It wasn't much of a ceremony. But there was a lot of people banging drums and pompous. The people involved in the ceremony, well, they kind of improvised what they thought was a ceremony, but I just saw it more as a bit of a Sid Rawle's getting attention. And I remember me and a few of the other old wallies being quite disgusted by it.
It was midday of the solstice, and somebody said, "Oh, they're scattering Wally's ashes." So Sid Rawle had them, and he was sort of just handing them out, and people were taking handfuls of ashes and scattering them on the stones there. And I put a bit on the heel stone. The wind came up and got a bit in my eye.
We had the Ace of Hearts, and that's the winning card before we even started.
He has a legacy because he was a person who had that seed idea. Let's go to Stonehenge and start a new birth of Albion, start the new age.
What I really noted is the similarity to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. As somebody who's dangerously dynamic being put out of the way.
I'm not sure that he would enjoy being such a cult figure. I'm not sure that he would have wanted it exactly, because I do believe he was quite a humble man underneath the showmanship.
Pretty naive in the way he handled himself with those that could lock him away. But that should never have happened to anybody.
It is nice to have heroes, positive role models, people that you can hang pegs on, and then knit stories and legends. I think we've always done that. I don't say he didn't exist. I just say that I think he's been built up a bit over and above what he was or is.
Icon is quite a good word in the sense of the Wally box and the idea of the tribe of Wallies and the fact that he was a fairly unbearable person to be around, but he's taken on this tremendous cult status. He was a natural extrovert, and he probably was certifiably mad, but he was kind of cuddly mad and exciting mad and very annoying mad.
The box then became a kind of icon of the festival movement, and it went around, various traveller sites. It kind of disappeared here, there and everywhere. I mean, when I first saw it, it was in TP Valley in 1996. Currently, Dean Phillips is looking after it.
To him, the experience on the land was important as anything he had to say. It wasn't to do with coming along and listening to the expert telling you what Wally was, because you were Wally. And the moment you were here, you were in Wally land. You were on Fort Wally. And So you could be a Wally amongst the stones, and you're as equal as he was, as they were. As Wally Wolf was just as important a Wally, and he was a dog.
That is the achievement of the counterculture, isn't it? That it's made festivals mainstream, even though there aren't any free festivals anymore.
The Stonehenge Free Festivals continued after Phil's death with bigger gatherings in 77 and 78, which in turn had a direct cause and effect on the Glastonbury Festival of today. The Glastonbury of 71 was a free festival on Michael Eavis's land, funded by Arabella Churchill and Andrew Kerr, who ran out of money, and so there were no Glastonburys directly afterwards. The story goes that a group of hippies that went to Stonehenge 78 decided to continue the party.
The police blockaded it, and then they got caught up in a traffic jam in Glastonbury. Michael Eavis got caught up in this as well, and the police asked him if these people could pull onto his land. And I was suddenly received a phone call saying there was a festival at Wordy Farm. Would I bring my stage down? Michael Eavis said the music enhanced the milk output of his cows. I think that set the ball rolling. I think Michael Eavis got the idea that it would be a good thing to have a festival there every year.
But while Glastonbury grew and grew to be the institution it is today, the Stonehenge Festival met a violent and bloody end. They called it the Battle of the Beanfield, yet this was no battle. It was a one-sided, premeditated attack by armed people on a set of unsuspected, unarmed people. A strange coincidence. On the 7th of October 1974, another member of the Wally tribe, Wally Jeff Moonlight, was found dead in Epping Forest, just a few miles away from where Phil was found dead a year later. This Wally's left hand was tied to a sapling tree. He died, apparently, from a combination of barbiturates, LSD and wine. Had the Wally tribe turned into a suicide cult, or was something even more sinister going on? Underground magazine Maya reported on it at the time, speculating on foul play. But the eventual official verdict, reported in the Daily Express, came to a different conclusion. The police concluded that Jeff, a known drug dealer, was alone testing a new batch of LSD, and he tied himself to a tree to stop himself running away from the hallucinations. Really? Would you test LSD on your own in a forest? Wouldn't tying yourself to a tree on LSD make you more likely to freak out? Maybe dark forces had intended to kill Wally Hope. The Wally who had made a public mockery of the legal system in the newspapers just 2 months before. And they got the wrong Wally. While the national newspapers were amused by the Wallies, darker forces were not enjoying the joke. This is what Martin Pritchard, ex-undercover policeman, said in his book Busted about the aftermath to Watchfield.
We knocked a few off later. We wanted to show these bloody hippies life was not so free and easy. We arranged a series of off-site busts, say 14 days after Watchfield. All over the country, kids who had given us 2 fingers were going to get busted.
The authorities had seen him in Watchfield. They weren't pleased that, in the sense that they hadn't achieved their end, and that was to put him out of operation, to cosh him chemically out of the picture. He'd turned up again. They followed him, waited. It was very unusual that the house was empty. And at the point at which it was empty one evening, they went round to the back door rather than using the front door where they might have been seen, knocked on that door. Wally heard it. He was upstairs. That's where his room was. He came down, opened the door. They came in, injected him, waited until it was quite clear that, they'd done the right job this time. Went back, obviously didn't lock the door because they wouldn't have been able to, and left.
Isn't this all just paranoid ravings? If Wally Hope was such a threat to the establishment and such a charismatic leader, why did none of his fellow Wallies, who were with him when he was arrested, kick up a fuss there and then? He remained in jail for 3 weeks before anybody knew about it, so hardly a person who could mobilise people in large numbers to threaten the establishment. After they incarcerated him, they could have legally kept him there indefinitely. So why release him at all? If they wanted to kill him, why not stage a car accident on his 2-day drive from the mental institution? But you could counter these questions with some of these. If his section under the Mental Health Act was genuine and nothing to do with Stonehenge, why was he released as soon as the festival finished? And why the prolonged fudged coroner's inquest? Why did the police make no proper effort to find Dr. Scott in Australia? Why did the mention of the needle mark disappear from the autopsy report? And who was Phil's visitor at Ongar on the last day of his life? And why was no attempt made to find out who it was?